And what was even more incredible is that mice that only ate during a particular feeding window also experienced some reversal of some prior negative health effects. So this study really lit up the world and got people excited about time-restricted eating. Again, they used an 8-hour feeding window. The story around that 8-hour feeding window is kind of interesting, though. Not many people know this because it wasn't included in the paper, and there was no reason to include it in the paper. Not to out anybody, but it turns out that the reason they used an 8-hour feeding window and not a 9-hour or a 10-hour feeding window is because studies of this sort are actually quite demanding to perform and require the constant presence of the graduate student or postdoc there to ensure that the food is in the cages at particular times and not in the cages at other times. And mice are really good at hiding food. They'll even hide food in their jowls. And so there's a lot of work that has to be done to prepare for that 8-hour feeding window and to make sure after that 8-hour feeding window, there's all the food has been removed from the cage and from the jowls of the mice and so forth. And it turns out that the significant other of the graduate student and or postdoc, I won't reveal who they were, running this study, forbid their significant other, the scientist, from being in the lab for periods of time that were much longer than the 10 or 12 hours that were required in order to ensure this 8-hour feeding window. So when we hear that 8-hour feeding windows are holy, they are not holy. And later we are going to talk about how eating for a time that's restricted to 8 hours versus 10 hours versus 12 hours, for instance, how that impacts various parameters like health parameters and weight loss, et cetera. But the 8-hour feeding window was actually created because of a real-world constraint on the research and the relationship of the researcher performing the research, not because there's anything holy about an 8-hour feeding window. Now, an important point about when the feeding window falls within the 24-hour cycle. It is very important that the feeding window fall during the more active phase of one's day. So for humans, that's typically in the early part of the day or the later part of the day, but not at night.